Welcome, everyone. Today, we're joined by Helen Kokk, who's an award-winning product design director who centers user experiences and has a passion for teaching others to do the same. Helen, thank you for joining us today. I wanted to start off to say, first of all, you seem to be everywhere, right? You were creative lead at Nortel. You have run workshops, mentor at Garage 48. You've co-founded Made by Agency, which actually designed the Estonian startup database. So tell me how you found yourself here. Take us through the designing your journey to the design field.
Alrighty. First of all, thanks for having me. It's truly a pleasure to be here and spread the word. Right. So usually when somebody asks me this question, I need to go back when I was 2 years old, right? Because when I was 2, I actually grabbed onto a pencil and started drawing. Usually I drew people. They look messed up. There's like 8 legs, 1 person. The eyes are like all over the place. So clearly my parents saw, like there's something to it, right? So the obvious choice was to put me in art school. So rewinding a little bit into the future. So yes, I did the preschool for arts. I did like whole my high school. I learned arts. And then I went on learning more about classical art. So painting, sculpting, anything, right? And then I hit a breaking point, actually, which I'm going to come back later on to, is that I wanted to be an architect. Like in my soul, I wanted to be an architect. But it was a hot summer like we have currently. And out of the blue, I decided graphic design. I'm going to go for graphic design. And I found myself in a teeny tiny design agency that's currently operating also here in Estonia. And I got really experimental. So I decided to focus on like variety of things like 3D, coding a little bit, graphic design, book designs, all of those things. And many, many, many years I did graphics. So I designed books, I designed calendars, business cards, you name it. But all of a sudden I found myself that I need something more. And I decided to focus on like small freelance projects. And I needed space where to work, right? Just a table, like just a teeny tiny table where somebody would have me. And luckily enough, I found myself being the first resident of Garage 48. And with that, Garage 48, the founders of Garage 48 decided to take me everywhere with them, to mentor, to participate in events. Like everywhere we went to, like Belarus, Georgia, Kyrgyzstan, like all those places in Europe and around. And lucky enough with Garage 48, they also offered me a challenge in Uganda, where I was establishing the startup ecosystem from the angle of designs. And with the startups, you obviously get the feels of like UX and UI, like a really close one. And I really love this experience because it's kind of like a boot camp, because developers and marketeers and like other people might ask, why this blue? Like, why are you choosing this blue? Or why is this like this constant ask for a why? And this obviously like ventured me into the field of service design. So trying to understand better, so we can actually map people, we can do stakeholder mapping, we can do this and that and da. And as I grew stronger over the years, then I always had this yes attitude. So if somebody gives me like an interesting project, then my first gut reaction is like, yes, let's do it. Like having this energy to do anything. And obviously picking up and saying yes to myself. So I found really interesting, for example, like I really wanted to go to the States. So I ventured into New York and California, where I stayed a little bit and gathered some knowledge there, came back to Estonia. And then Nortal approached me saying, you did a lecture for Nortal people, do you want to kind of like establish the UI, UX disciplines in Nortal as well? And so I decided to say, yes, I'm going to take up that challenge. And I did that challenge for 5 years. It took me also to live in Abu Dhabi for a year and work with projects there. And after 5 years, I found myself that this challenge I can consider level completed. So now I'm asking myself, where is the next challenge to say yes to? So that's my long story short in a couple of sentences, if you will.
That definitely makes sense. I like this idea that the shift from the graphic design part of your career to kind of the UX UI experience seems really steady in a way that, yes, it was you saying yes to a challenge, but at the same time, it wasn't like this big chunk. It was just small habits that you were building and the skill set that you were building out to get to that point. And I know that you said your approach has been to say yes. Is there any other decision making that you do around your career and how you see yourself moving forward, what your vision is going into the future?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. So 3 things. So first of all, I kind of mentioned that before as well, that this constant ask of why, right? If anything doesn't make sense, then there's like, you cannot do that, right? So this constantly asking yourself, like, if I can answer this question, then it makes sense. And then the second criteria that also goes with like any kind of like design field is belief, right? So because like others can sense if you don't believe in something, right? So whatever like we choose, including myself, I really need to like, people need to see the passion in my eyes, right? And that's basically the things, like the why needs to be answered and the belief needs to be there, which brings the passion within itself.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is something that a lot of people struggle with anytime they're starting something, whether it's design related or not, is you don't feel confident, but it's kind of the saying, like, fake it till you make it. You have to believe that you can do it. And then anyway, you learn, like you said, that brings in the question of why. If you haven't figured out the why yet, you just try something else. So I think that's a really nice way to approach things. And it seems to have served you very well. And in terms of decision making when you design, do you follow the same process or do you have something else that you work by?
Yeah, so I was thinking about this a little bit, and I think like the number one thing that I would like to kind of like bring out is also because I've had the kind of luxury, or not the luxury, but the like one thing I've done next to Nortal and outside in the community is train the youth, right? Like kind of also duplicate myself in a sense, right? And so usually what I tell to people is that, yes, if you're part of my team, like I can be the creative lead, but if you are working on a project, then I cannot tell you what's right because you have done the research. You need to make the decision, right? So what I would say to decision making is like, we shouldn't look for other people's confirmation. We should take it as a feedback, as reflection, but each and every one of us should have the belief and then make the decision. And this literally applies to everything. So even if I'm pitching, let's say, a project, then I need to believe in it so much that I have gotten enough data to make a decision. And I will take the full responsibility that this will get us to our end goals that we have.
Yeah, absolutely. It made me think a little bit of the startup community, which you're a part of, and this idea that a lot of startups and founders say that really when they get investment, that they get an investment in themselves, right? Because they believe in the idea, they kind of make investors or other people they're bringing on board really believe in them, even if the idea feels a little distant still to others, as long as you carry that conviction. And you're absolutely right. Bringing that to all parts of your life is really really important.
Yeah, like just to expand on top of this, right? Like this is why for me, like when we're talking about projects, then I always start with people. So this team, by the way, they did that project, right? And this is what makes sense by the end of the day, like because it correlates really well what UX and service design is about. It's human-centric everything, right? Yeah. So if you take the human away and make things abstract, before we talk about labels, then it's nonsense. It's nothing, like in its like really core essence.
Yeah. How do you approach getting to know people, whether it's in your professional career or for a project, right? There's this sense you have to understand the end user. Who is this really for? Do you have certain ways that you like to go about that?
Yeah, so this is definitely the key word here is empathy to anything, right? So when you go to like new project or you need to find people, you still need to understand, like why, kind of like what's their reasoning, right? So as long as you can create empathy, name it be like, let's talk about dogs, or let's talk about, I don't know, whatever, So this is basically how you kind of like get tapped into projects, and how you can get end users on board. Like, we cannot see each other with the same like flat view that we think about ourselves. Let's put it this way.
Right, absolutely. Different experiences, and we all have different backgrounds. Speaking to that, is there a project that you've worked on in the past that really stretched your empathy muscle, let's say?
Oh yes. So it's actually a story that I also tell in some of my lectures. So I had this really nice experience working with the Eesti.ee team. And since Eesti.ee is this portal where all the people living in Estonia can kind of like log in and like use the portal, then it's literally like, and one of the golden rules that I have is like, if I'm working with a project and end users, I cannot know the person who I'm like having a conversation with, right? Like, we need to be neutral towards each other. But how do you approach a person like who you don't know, right? Especially here in Estonia, it might be difficult because everyone's like, so what's your agenda? What do you actually want from me, And I found this really cool trick that I own 2 dogs, and I started to work in cafeterias, like in Caffeine, in Reval Cafe, wherever. And people started to approach me because people are, you dogs, can I like make a picture? I'm like, yes. Can I have a few questions, So it's like, and this is like the constant hunt for me, like how to like bring this empathy more and more, like what tools do I have at my disposal to approach people I don't know, actually.
Right. Have you found that experience to be different across cultures, since you did get to work in so many different places?
For sure. So what I like to say is, like, for example, when I was in New York and California, I would say it's rather easy, like, so like in New York, it was literally, like, wear something cool and people approach you, like nice shoes or nice pants, like that is super easy, Same goes for California, because like I can go to Starbucks and people are like, yeah, I know you for 10 years, although we just met like a couple of seconds ago. Yeah. But in Abu Dhabi, I did learn also, it took me some time, but it's also the small things, right? So so it might it might sound funky, but for example, one thing that I found was that when I needed to approach ladies, then I started to do nail art and these drawings on the hand. And because like when I had these, then the ladies would approach like, oh, cool, nice, la, like cool thing. Yeah. And then I could like, I had my way in, right? And also one thing that we have to understand about the culture there is that it's a gift-giving culture. So instead of like even if somebody introduces you to somebody, the first thing you should do is give them a gift. It'd be chocolate, it'd be like small statue, something. That's your way in. So basically, that creates like also empathy.
How did you learn that? Just from trial and error, or did somebody tip you?
Just trial and error. Ask people around. Notice things, observe constantly. Because if you're working in the field where I'm working constantly, it's like your mind never switches off, right? You step in a room, your first gut reaction is like scan everything, and then you kind of like go with it.
Find somebody, zone in on them, and then use them. That's really, really neat.
It's definitely like one thing I've just discussed with my team as well. Like, and one common thread that we found about each other is that we're all people watchers. Like, we sit in a cafeteria and we just watch the world go by.
I can relate to that. I think one of my favorite things anywhere, but especially traveling, is like finding a cool spot and just seeing what people are doing. So I completely understand that. So you had lots of successes. Is there any failure that really stands out, and maybe what you learned from it?
For sure. What comes to failure, what I like to say is that usually I don't talk about like major failures, which of course I do have a lot of them. I do. But it's the small failures every day. Like it's noticing your own self, like how can I be better tomorrow than I was today, right? So from week to week, I can give these failures, But I would say, like, if I would put something out there, which really closely ties together with the empathy that I talked about, the most common place where we fail, including myself, is basic communication. So either we are not being truthful with ourselves or with each other. So I'm speaking with somebody, but I'm not actually saying out loud what I want, or it's hiding information, or it's not giving a clear ask, and then we're disappointed in each other. Like, how come you didn't give me this? Like, and then I build up something in my head. So one thing where I'm trying to be better constantly is basic communication.
I think absolutely that I would agree with that. I would imagine that plays a role in how you interact with people, especially when it comes to getting feedback from potential users, right? Like you said, most of us are either unconsciously not very good at communicating, or there might be, some things that people don't want to share that you're asking for. How do you work around that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there's a bunch of things there, and this is why I love theater. I love going to musicals and stuff, because I think one part of the communication that we tend to forget is the body language. It's one thing is words that we use, but the other thing is, like, people actually reveal a lot of information about themselves with gestures, with how we kind of how we look at something, like what kinds of like wiggles do we do with our bodies, right? So every time, like when I'm focusing on a project, then half of my brain is actually looking at the body language. Like, like if they're actually bored, although they don't say it out that they're bored, or they're excited, but they don't say out loud that they're excited. So there's like a lot of tricks to it. And in theater, you can actually like learn, because they need to act constantly, right? And so it's definitely like one thing that we tend to forget, and including ourselves again, because if I have crossed hands, like I might send out the vibe to somebody, and they unconsciously feel that I'm not into the conversation, let's say.
Right, absolutely. So you're training yourself, but you're getting to enjoy theater. So I really like that approach. I think the other thing that made me think of is if we're talking about body language and that being part of how you learn about people and what they want, how did you deal with that during the pandemic when everything was on a screen? You're not seeing everything. There's a loss of this rhythm of when you talk, when you don't talk, right? All the memes of, oh, no, you go ahead. So there's a reason for that. How did you deal with that in your work?
Yeah, so it was definitely a challenge, as I believe for everybody, right? But two things that I did, like two hacks that I managed to find. So one thing to create the atmosphere of, like I'm here to have like this talk with you, is that every time I had conversations, I deliberately sat in front of a background that was super vivid. So I had a bunch of paintings in the background, like flowers, books, and stuff. And you cannot believe, but how many people come in and like, I like that painting, or I like this or that. So it's the small thing that leads you into this conversation before like heavily kind of like doing things, right? Yeah. And sometimes also like using, for example, like it's not an accident that I bring my dog into the camera again, like, because if I can sense that this like this kind of like brings the atmosphere, I do it. And one shock thing that I discovered with the lectures in Zoom calls, like when nobody turns on their cameras, it's a trick that I learned from my sister's teachers, is that please don't make me feel as I'm walking in a graveyard, like with all those like black boxes with the initials on top, Oh my God, this worked like so well, automatically half of the people cameras on.
Yeah, I think that's really neat. And I like that the way you learned it, right? It's just from somebody else that's not even like directly told to you. I think that's such a great way to absorb information and inform ourselves. And kind of like you said earlier, this idea of when you're starting a project and you take the lead, so you have to absorb all the information that you need to use it. Do you have any resources that you really lean on in terms of whether it's leading a project or taking on a new role that you like to reference?
Yeah, I have a bunch of resources that I have, like when it comes to like basic internet and Google, right? But I would say that the most valuable resource at our disposal is the one that we forget the most, is actually the network, right? So we shouldn't hesitate reaching out in basic tools like Instagram or Facebook or LinkedIn, but make it personal. Like, like again, like create groups of people where people can like have this like conversation, like ask people out, like just to tap into the research and resources, But yeah, I definitely have my go-to like inspirational tools, like where I gather like source of inspiration, and then I start to narrow down and pull threads.
Yeah, I think I agree with you, right? That we tend to have a lot of untapped information by way of other people. I think that's a really good way to look at it.
Yeah.
In terms of this, is there any specific people that have helped you along the way to get you to where you are in your career now?
For sure. And it's so basically, it's also one thing that I suggest to everybody is I call it the collective brain, right? So how you can amplify your own brain, right? And I have my own personal grid of, I call them advisors/mentors. And I think this is something that each and everyone forgets, like we, like when juniors usually think about it, right? Because they know that they're at the starting point and they need to get mentors. But at one point, the more you grow as a specialist, you kind of like forget this basic thing, right? Let's say you're working as a lead or something, right? But you are not the smartest in the room. That's a fact, right? So I'm really heavily leaning on my grid of advisors. And I think like most of the credit, like where I'm currently at, I need to give like kudos to them for sure. And I don't forget it, like basically every now and then when we meet, like I'm giving them constant feedback, that this helps to get there and this and this and that.
I think that's really a great way to do it. Any chance you're giving them gifts, like from your experience?
It depends. Yes, again, it's the empathy thing, right? Yeah. It depends, like because gift doesn't need to be like a physical thing, right? The gift can be also a service. It can be words. It can be whatever, right? So it's the thinking outside of the box,
Yeah. Do you think of your like lectures and helping younger people in their processes as your way of mentoring also?
For sure. So this is the thing that I have found for myself is that the style, how I also give lectures and speeches, I call it rather inspirational. So I never go heavily into like a topic, but rather, like with this short time that I've been usually given, like if it's 25 minutes or 2 hours, I try to squeeze in like great stories and something that inspires and give, like guidance, also resources where to kind of expand this area, like if it inspires. And I'm really glad to see like a lot of people actually taking off, with it, and like years later, like hearing like some of the impact that it has brought.
I think that's great. Putting the spark and then letting everybody else figure out where it takes them. I think that's awesome. And then I think my last question would be, is there anything that I didn't ask that you would want to share?
Oh, that's a great question. Yeah, I would need to think a little bit about it. But yeah, like I think the last thing that I would like to share that I forgot, like which I mentioned early on, was that and I just 2 days ago I had a very sparking discussion with another design lead in Estonia about it. I had two paths, right? Graphic design and architecture. But architecture has never left me over these years. So I've been really into mostly interior design, but also like I just designed my own house in south of Estonia. And then I understood something that he said 2 days ago to me, is that when you're thinking in a form of architecture, you think in space. And space relates to, like, if we're talking about like user interface, so UX, it also relates into the field. So basically, you can make better decisions. So one last thought I would like to put out there is that don't get stuck just with, like UX, UI, I need to Google UX, UI. Venture to other fields. We should venture to other fields to make our core stronger, actually.
Yeah, absolutely. I like that comparison because it really is, we live in space. We just happen to think of things really digitally lately. but really the way you interact with everything around you is super important.
Yeah, but it's also with projects, right? Like imagine building a portal for, I don't know, airport, let's say. And then usual thing that we do is look at competition. But why? If you can also look at the real estate or car manufacturers, right? And that inspires the topic that you actually have at hand.
That's even cooler. Really awesome. Yeah. Drawing inspiration from everywhere. Well, thank you. I've definitely drawn a lot of inspiration from you. Thank you for joining us. It has been really awesome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.